Okay, friends, I thought we would do something kind of fun today. I just finished reading The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand, and I thought we could go through some of the summaries online, as well as some of the characters and themes on websites like Cliffnotes and other book summary websites. I did read Atlas Shrugged a year ago, and I thought it was much better than The Fountainhead, but after I finished reading Atlas Shrugged, it kind of felt like I had finished like a TV show where I invested a lot of time into like getting to know characters and a plot finally ended, and so you kind of think about like, dang, there's no more episodes to watch. And so something that was really fun then, and I wish I did this on camera in the moment of the first time that I read it, is that I looked at the Cliffnotes summary and all the characters, and I went through all of them, kind of comparing my mental notes, seeing if I remember who did what, and also trying to see some stuff that I may have missed, and also what other people thought of it. I also thought this would be fun to do, because in both Atlas Shrugged and The Fountainhead, and this is not my favorite part of her writing, but Ayn Rand does all this build-up for certain characters, or sometimes there's just minor characters, and you get a little invested in them, kind of like James Taggart's wife, who disappeared for 500 pages until she committed suicide, and also other characters like Kent Lansing in The Fountainhead, who seem like they're going to be an awesome part of Howard Roark's team, and then he just disappears for another couple hundred pages, and he gets one line where yes, he did fight for Roark and he built the Aquitania Hotel or whatever, but then you just never hear about Lansing ever again, except for like maybe he was mentioned at the trial, I think, at the very end of the book. But basically he's got this awesome principled build-up, and then he gets like 2 sentences for the rest of the novel. Henry Cameron seemed awesome enough in itself. Ooh, I can't wait to talk about that with you guys. But then after he dies, he gets very little mention for the rest of the book, but surprisingly, he was mentioned at the very end of the book. I just read the last chapter not even 10 minutes ago, so we'll kind of go through this chapter 16 through 20 summary, and then we'll go over some of the character analysis and see some other themes and just kind of talk about them in general. Also, as you can see, I'm on the right side of the screen, and I'm going to try to monitor it so it doesn't look ridiculous for you guys. Analysis chapter 16 through 20. When Wynand must choose between his paper and principles, he finds himself in a situation Roark has faced many times. Roark always does the right principled thing, and Wynand doesn't. Both men have to choose between closing their offices and compromising their principles, but whereas Roark chooses to become a physical laborer rather than a compromise, earlier in the book, Wynand cannot bring himself to throw away his life's work. Instead, he chooses to save his paper, even though the decision robs his life of meaning. Wynand becomes a tragic figure because he does not act with weak ignorance as someone does like Keating. He has the capacity to succeed and fails despite it. When Wynand first sacrifices himself for the sake of power, the failure seems understandable because the cynicism comes from a deep disillusionment. Wynand finds a chance for redemption after meeting with Roark, and Wynand's fall seems all the more tragic because it happens as he stands on the verge of redemption. Wynand does not even gain fame or fortune at the expense of his self-respect, for in the end he closes the paper down rather than rehiring Toohey. Not only does Wynand commit emotional suicide, he does so for the sake of a paper he'll destroy. I feel like of the 4 characters that we go over the most in the book, of course each section's named after them, Keating, Toohey, Wynand, and Roark, I feel like I had the most trouble understanding Wynand. Maybe I didn't pay attention enough when I was reading him, but it felt like Roark was by far the easiest person to understand. Obviously, he's like the main character of the book. Keating was very easy to understand as well because he's like the opposite of Roark basically. I felt like I could comprehend Toohey's character a little bit more, and Wynand was probably the most difficult because he gets a little mention here and there, and only in part 3 does he really start to be like a person. Keating and Roark were probably the easiest to comprehend because they had so much focus at the beginning of the book, and then Wynand and Toohey get this line here and there. The newspaper of the banner gets mentioned once in a while in the first part of the book, and there are these 2 kind of characters that are in the background, at least in part 1, and at least Toohey manifests into someone you can kind of understand, whereas Wynand was a little bit harder in the third part of the book. It was probably the most complex main character to understand. The novel's final images evoke the first scene in the novel. When Dominique climbs the unfinished Wynand building to see Roark, she waters up past a cityscape full of the same hard, beautiful, and natural elements that surround Roark when he stands naked over the cliffs in the first chapter. I think he was going for a swim at that point of the book when he was like gonna get expelled. In the final chapter, Roark stands on a skyscraper he's created as if he seized all the elements in the first chapter and made them even more beautiful with his genius. So this is kind of funny, right? I'm going to stop it right there. Whenever we read these older books from the 40s, 50s, 60s, 30s, 20s, anything really before the 70s, these, as they call them, classics, there's so much, especially when we were in high school, there is so much emphasis on the colorful language and whatever else could be used as like techniques from the authors to kind of demonstrate things in certain lights, and they go with like thematic, like I'm sure we all remember about like the blue drapes at the theater mean that the whole crowd was sad or something, right? I know it sounds ridiculous, but in grade school we went through that religiously trying to see like themes being related by the author. So today it's kind of funny. I think in the age of the internet we kind of just throw that out the window for the most part, and we're just like, okay, the drapes were blue. What of it, you know? And that's why I think the summary here is kind of overdoing it. But I just thought that was kind of a funny thing to think about, right? Because don't forget, this book was written in the 40s. Atlas Shrugged was in 57. I'm just going to mention Atlas Shrugged here and there because I really liked that book and I thought it was better than The Fountainhead. But The Fountainhead was written 14 years earlier or so. Anyway, just as Roark laughs at the beginning of the novel, scorning convention and reveling his independence, so now at the end of the novel, he does stand apart from the mediocrity of the world below him. The novel closes with the statement, "There was only the ocean and the sky and the figure of Howard Roark." This elevation of Roark by comparing him to such profound bodies as the ocean and the sky is a virtual deification of Roark, a declaration that his spirit alone matters. The end of the novel feels triumphant because Roark has survived unchanged, not because the rest of the world has changed. Collectivism and altruism thrive, and Toohey already schemes again, planning another rise to power. The only thing that matters, however, is that these forces have not succeeded in destroying Roark. Rand's philosophy does not seek to affect the whole world. She does not want to change people's minds, but to reach and encourage people who already think like she does. Roark does not succeed in winning over the whole world, but he does manage to defend his own ideas and inspire others, and this is the only triumph the novel requires. Yeah, I guess. I'm not in love with that summary. And now for my favorite part, the character list. Okay, let's go through Howard Roark, the novel's hero, a brilliant architect of absolute integrity. Roark has friends, colleagues, but relies on himself alone. He's tall, gaunt, angular, with gray eyes and distinctive orange hair, born to a poor family. Roark supports himself throughout high school and college by working odd jobs on construction sites. I guess I missed that, and that would explain why him and Red, Mike, ended up being such good friends. He brings in the same fiery intensity to whatever job he does, whether it's manual labor or architecture. He loves the beautiful Dominique Francon with a violent passion. He is the novel's idealization of man, bringing innovative and joyful buildings to the rest of the world. What happens if I click this button? Okay, I guess I'm going to be clicking on the in-depth character section because it's not actually that long. But Howard Roark is an undisputed hero of the Fountainhead, and his story drives the novel. His name contains the words hard and roar, both of which accurately describe his tough, determined character. Roark's buildings suggest his personality. Both describe his tough, determined character. Roark's buildings suggest his personality. For like Roark, they are innovative and austere. Roark never compromises or deviates from his principles. Rand holds him up as everything that man can and should be. Consequently, Roark does not develop over the course of the novel. The ideal man does not need to change. Although Rand despised religion, she often described Roark as if he was a religious figure, and he never actively seeks converts, but he inspires absolute devotion and rapture in his followers. Cameron, Mallory, Dominique, and Wynand change their entire belief systems after meeting him. Dominique in particular exhibits a religious passion for Roark, racked by ecstasy and guilt as if inspired by Messiah. Like all Christ figures in literature, Roark's enemies persecute him, despite the hatred of the world. Roark lives life as Rand thinks it should be lived. Okay, Toohey. Okay, Roark is a great character, we all know that. Don't really have to expand on that. In direct contrast with Roark, Ellsworth Toohey embodies everything about evil of mankind. He is irredeemably corrupt and evil. Whereas Roark never tries to win friends or influence people, Toohey's power lies entirely in his ability to control weaker minds and souls. Toohey's evil as ingrained as Roark's goodness. Toohey learns the practice of manipulation as a child and turns it into an art by the time he graduates from college, by making people feel small and guilty. Toohey shakes their faith in their own abilities and then assumes control of their lives. Toohey preaches selflessness and the ignorance of the ego to force people to act with humble mediocrity. Toohey has no talents of his own, so he makes himself excellent by grinding down his followers. His tactics frequently evoke those of Joseph Stalin, the former Russian revolutionary who emerged as Russia's dictator. Yeah, that's kind of evident. I think the most glaringly obvious example of this was when he went to the house of Peter Keating and he started berating him basically in that speech, but that was pretty good. Of course, I think that Rand does this in both Atlas Shrugged and Fountainhead, but as one of the main antagonists of the book, he's a little bit too stereotypically evil, and his flaws are a little bit too obvious, but I think she's trying to make a point by that, so I can't hold that against her. Basically, Toohey's like manipulative and just represents like collectivism as a whole. Okay, on to Dominique Francon, a very interesting character. Dominique's beauty and strength of spirit make her perverse, unusual woman and the perfect complement to Howard Roark. At the beginning of the novel, she is convinced of the world's rottenness and believes that greatness has no chance of survival. She surrounds herself with things that she despises to avoid watching the world destroy the things she loves. Dominique instantly recognizes Roark's greatness, but she does not initially believe that he can survive in a selfless and irrational society. The thought that a man like Roark needs society in order to build pains Dominique as she tries to destroy him before the rest of the world can. Yet Dominique wants to fail in her bid to destroy Roark because if she fails, it means an absolute good and genius can survive even in an evil world. I would say Dominique's one of the most complex characters in the book because I can't really understand her and why she was doing what she was doing. I don't know if that says something about me, or it's just typical for us to not be able to understand women these days. Hashtag yeah, baby. But I just really had a hard time trying to understand and comprehend that she would meet someone that she really likes. She gets raped by him. And I didn't pick up that she got raped in the first part. I thought it was just completely mutual. But she gets raped by him. And then while she's totally obsessed with him, she goes to destroy him. I thought it was a very, very strong part on her philosophy to be able to do that. I mean, I'm trying to think, when's the last time that you had sex? I mean, is that normal? Is that something I missed out on? Is that something girls do? Do girls go have sex with guys and then try to destroy them even though they really like them? I mean, maybe? Isn't that usually a skill issue? Like, you're just being a douche to her usually? and she's just responding. I don't know. I think that's pretty like complex or whatever. I don't know. I think that's a little bit too much. But it did make her an interesting character because it's not going to be some like, oh my god, I'm totally in love with the main character of the book who's like a total stud. Wow, let's just make it a normal love story. She definitely did make it interesting in that respect, so I can't fault her for that. Now for Gail Wynand, easily the most difficult character to understand of all the 4 characters. The charismatic, capable, and aristocratic Wynand straddles the line between mainstream society and Roark's world, and this division makes him the novel's tragic figure. Like Roark, Wynand has extraordinary capabilities and energy, but unlike Roark, he lets the world corrupt him. When we first meet Wynand, he is entirely a man of the outside world, exclusively involved with society and its interests. His youthful idealism has been crushed by the world's cynicism. Wynand makes his living with a newspaper that reports on the vulgar and the common. This involvement with the world leaves Wynand misanthropic, bored, and suicidal. Wynand's worldview changes when he meets Dominique and Roark, who ignite the passion and integrity lingering within Wynand. During Roark's trial, Wynand fights the world again and he tries to turn his life around. He eventually feels they cannot escape the ugliness that he's created. Tragically, Wynand compromises at the last minute and loses his chance at salvation. So I got some of this, right? I think that I missed something here, but it basically says that Wynand compromises at the last minute and loses his chance at salvation. So with Roark being acquitted by that jury of like hard asses, basically, Wynand still detended even if he was completely not happy with Roark or whatever, right? Wynand still wants to get that building built at the end of the novel, which is what he's building. Well, I don't know. I think for an in-depth character thing here, I definitely missed something. And see, that was kind of one of the things about this book that I had a little trouble with. Some of the, like I said, Wynand specifically, I had a lot more trouble trying to comprehend. And I think that the plot of the Fountainhead overall, even though it kind of had a moment at the very end of the book that was kind of like had that passion of Atlas Shrugged, it wasn't constant throughout the book, and it was a little bit harder to pay attention, especially in the third part. And I think with Atlas Shrugged having a lot more moments with the fiery passion kind of burst outs at the end of the novel of the Fountainhead, you know, think about it, right? You had Hank Rearden's trial, that seemed pretty big at the time. Hank Rearden and Dagny both defied all odds and made the crazy train run or whatever the name was, I can't remember, because of the Rearden steal. Then at some point he got blackmailed, and then he signed over the rights to the steal or whatever, I can't remember. I read this over a year ago. But then Passion of the Trial at the Fountainhead and the Passion of the Trial at like Hank Rearden's, both of those were really awesome moments. And because it was like there were a few more moments of that in Atlas Shrugged, and there was only one moment at the end of the Fountainhead, that's why I kind of felt like it was easier to get dialed into the Atlas Shrugged novel way more than this one. So my summary there is, yes, I have a skill issue when I'm reading. On to Peter Keating. Rand has little sympathy for the rise and fall of Peter Keating. Keating starts off with a young, attractive architecture student, although he's clearly Roark's inferior. Their lives and careers advance in parallel fashion. By the novel's end, however, Keating is a weak and alcoholic nobody, the exact fate once reserved for talented men like Henry Cameron. Whereas Cameron suffers because of others, however, Keating is a victim of his own mistakes. Unlike Wynand, who suffers for turning his back on his own potential, Keating is born mediocre and weak and never had a chance at greatness. Instead, Keating suffers for denying his own mediocrity, for thinking himself too good for a modest but happy life. In the Fountainhead, character determines fate, and the moment Keating becomes dishonest as well as weak, he dooms himself to unhappiness. Yeah, I feel like Keating was a pretty rough character. In the beginning of the novel, he was a lot easier and kind of Weasley to kind of maybe not identify with, but at least like understand. But as time goes on further and further, it was just like, ooh, it just gets harder and harder and cringier, you know? And that was completely her intention when she was writing it, right? We definitely had some cringy characters in Atlas Shrugged as well, you know? James Taggart. This is kind of like the James Taggart of the novel, I guess you could say, right? So I guess it's not going to let me go to the other people summaries of the book, and I didn't realize that. But here's what I can tell you about reading Atlas Shrugged. The Cliffnotes version of Atlas Shrugged with the summary is so much better than the Fountainhead one. I felt like when I was reading the Fountainhead one, it was missing details all the time. So whatever the Cliffnotes version did was much, much better with Atlas Shrugged. So that's why when I was doing this, I found all these characters, even if it went over them very briefly, and it did an excellent job in Atlas Shrugged. So now that I finished the book, and even though the summaries on Cliffnotes weren't amazing, I can actually look at these character analyses, and oh my god, this is way bigger than I thought it would be. So I'm kind of reading through this, so we don't have to be too repetitive here, but a lot of this is kind of, you know, touched on stuff we've already talked about, or stuff that should be inherently obvious about Howard Roark. This one goes into more depth, and I kind of like that. Further, Howard Roark is a selfish man in the positive sense that Ayn Rand means this. He's true to his values, to his convictions, to his thinking, to his mind itself. When the board of the Manhattan Bank building wants to alter his design, Roark rejects the proposal for a new design, calling his behavior the most selfish thing you've ever seen a man do. Despite being destitute, he gives up a lucrative publicity-generating commission in order to stand by the integrity of his design. And he calls this act selfish. Yeah, I remember. That was kind of an interesting moment, right? Because she's saying This is the whole thing with Ayn Rand, and this was very clear in Atlas Shrugged as well, is no compromise, I don't give a fuck, take it or leave it, that is how it's supposed to be, right? And at the end of the book in the trial, she kind of goes over this pretty in depth, right? But you also have to look at your life too. I mean, are you compromising in any way in your life right now? I remember when I had my first job, I was compromising all the way, right? When I was doing taxes, I was doing something that, I was doing something I didn't like. I actually don't hate doing taxes. Like, it's not that bad. It's because it's something that I like, my brain just kind of comprehends well. It's not that bad to me, but I was compromising in every way because now I'm working this job that has like 50 or 60 hours a week. It has all these people that I don't necessarily want to deal with, and I have to kind of compromise because there's all these personalities that I have to try to mold myself and try to work around, right? So really when you're employed, you can almost just say that you're compromising in one way or another because you're not doing something on your own, right? I guess that's one thing that seems to be a little bit apparent, but I wanted to at least touch upon this because Roark is someone who would rather go work at a rock quarry and be subjected to brutal physical labor rather than compromise in any way, shape, or form. Back to this. To be true to himself, a man must first have a self. He must think independently, he must judge, he must form values and act in pursuit of those values. He must never sacrifice them. This is exactly what Roark does. The integrity of his design is far more important than the money or recognition that will accrue from commission. In remaining true to his values and judgment, Roark is true to the deepest core of his self. This is selfishness in its highest and best sense. That's pretty true, and I think that that's the best thing about the novels. It kind of does say something about, just because you're going to get a shitload of money for designing something doesn't mean that you should compromise in any sort of way, right? And with such a writer that's so politically motivated, she's basically saying the same thing. When it comes to politics, do not fucking compromise. Do not sign that check. Make no way, right? Because if you compromise once, it's going to keep going. You're going to compromise again. You're compromising again. Compromise again. And then that's where the phrase, if you give an inch, they'll take a mile comes from, because you do it because you've compromised every inch for a mile. You've done that for 5,000 feet, which is probably like, 60,000 inches or something? So with 60,000 compromises, which will take some time, you'll find yourself at that place, and then you'll wonder how you got there, because you compromised so many times. You said, okay, just this time. Okay, just this time. Just this time. Just this time. You kick the can down a few generations, 20 years, 25 years, 40 years. Well, it could take 100 years. But eventually, the next generation, whoever it is, will find themselves at that point and be like, how the hell did we get here? I never even signed up for this, right? An important moral question that Ayn Rand seeks to answer in Roark's character considers the relationship between the moral and the practical. Many people in real life, as well as Gail Wynand and Dominique Francon in the novel, believe that practical success requires the betrayal of an individual's moral principles. It is often said that to succeed, one must play the game, or conform to the practices of one's company or profession, even if one finds them unethical. It's one thing to have like a job where you're kind of doing whatever. Let's just say that you're like the lowly person at the Kroger and you're like stocking shelves or whatever, right? It's one thing to have a job like that where you've kind of compromised in a way, but it's another to be doing something that's completely totally unethical, right? For example, you can make money just being an assassin, right? Just go kill a few people. Hey, you're making money, but that's like obviously like unethical or whatever, right? If you're cheating people out of money, you're killing people, Obviously, I said that half-assedly, just to make the point. But at what point do you draw the line and say that, you know what, I'm not playing the game whatsoever? To hold one's scruples according to his way of thinking results only in loss of job or income or in failure in some form. But in the Fountainhead, Ayn Rand builds a convincing argument that this cynical view is false. Howard Roark, she shows, is both a moral man and practical. His strength of character is demonstrated throughout the story. He's fully committed to the artistic integrity of every one of his designs. He takes a laborer's job in a granite quarry rather than compromising the smallest detail of his building. That definitely gave me something to think about, because if even the smallest thing pisses you off, or it's just full of incompetence, should you just throw the whole thing out, kind of like the baby out with the bathwater, or whatever the phrase is? I mean, it was completely in protest that he'd rather do physical brutal labor than compromise with shitheads, right? Integrity means conscientious commitment and action to the principles held in your mind, and Roark exemplifies this virtue consistently, including when faced with destitution. Further, he's also a practical man. Roark, above all characters in the novel, is a can-do giant of supreme competence. He excels at every aspect of building, from design to construction, and by the novel's end, he's achieved a significant commercial success. He's now established on his own terms in a field of architecture. That Roark is both moral and a practical individual should be clear, but the most original aspect of Ayn Rand's presentation is that he's practical because he's moral, and that these two qualities exist in a causal relationship. Just highlighting some parts of the next passage. Each man must accept responsibility for his own thinking and his own survival. Each must be sovereign in living by his own most conscientious judgment. If a man sincerely and his most scrupulously honest judgment believes a claim to be true, then he must hold this to be the case, even though all society opposes him. That's tough, but once you become principled, that starts to get easier. To be a thinker means to go by the factual evidence of case and not by the judgment of others. To be a thinker means that if a man recognizes the perfection of an architectural design, he must not compromise it merely because others oppose it. A human being learns from others, as Roark does from Cameron, but he can neither think for others nor permit others to think for him. Any productive activity, including construction work performed by Roark's friend Mike Donnigan, requires understanding. Constructive work of any kind is not blindly achieved by mimicking the actions of others. The activities of building and growing, creating food, houses, automobiles, medical cures, airplanes, and computers aren't intellectual in nature. All successful living for human beings requires commitment to the mind. Roark's ability, his ultimate commercial success, and his happiness are a result of his own thinking. Successful living forbids man to betray his mind. To surrender one's judgment is to exist like Peter Keating, a form which no success or happiness is possible. Moral virtue is a requirement of practical success, not a hindrance to it. So we'll get to my thoughts once we go over Cameron in a little bit more detail. I thought he was a great character, but also had some flaws that I don't know if they were necessarily fair to, and I want them to be addressed at least. But this is pretty true. The activities of building and growing stuff in basically like society are intellectual in nature, right? So when we go through the school system that we go through right now, do we really find that we are building and growing our intellectual capacities? I mean, come the fuck on. You know what? Let's open Grok and ask it something. I mean, here we go, right? One size fits all, and even Grok knows it can answer this. It's funny when you ask an artificial intelligence about the intelligence nurturing of human beings, but one size fits all, everyone's the same. We're gonna stoop down to the lowest common denominator and go at their speed. So if you're anything above that, go fuck yourself, basically. You're gonna have to go as slow as the last person, so that person gets neglected. Focus on memorization, of course, and then you forget it after the test. We've all been through that. Limited real world application. When was the last time you did a hypotenuse? My guess is that most of you probably smoke more hypotenuse rather than actually solve triangles, hypotenuses, and other bullshit like that. Like, remember geometry and, like, what, proofs? Teacher constraints, yeah, this is brutal. Because you can, it's total just like RNG basically who you get. Most are bad or inadequate. And like, here's the thing too, right? Like when you have a teacher that has like a lot of passion, think about how much they had to go against, think about how uncommon that is for teachers now, right? They're going against the grain of things and just being like something that students actually like want to vibe with, you know? Anyway, whatever. Okay, so this article actually does a really good job clearing up some things that I missed with Gail Wynand. And I'm going to go over the third paragraph here. Wynand is a man of exalted values who panders to the debased standards of the crowd. Ultimately, the contradiction destroys him. While he defends Roark in The Banner, his thinking for the first time governs his paper's policy. He writes brilliant editorials defending lone geniuses who stood against the men of their times, great individuals who, through persecuted by their societies, were vindicted by posterity. For the first time, Wynand uses his paper to defend the noble ideals that he treasures. And this is what we saw when he was defending Roark. But he miscalculates. Those whom he panders cannot appreciate a noble ideal, and those who appreciate a noble ideal have long stopped since taking Wynand seriously. So go figure. Once you start becoming genuine and authentic and congruent to your personality, you put it in your work. The crowd that you've built for yourself just completely disappears, right? Think about it like this. Can you imagine if the mainstream media and a lot of the content creators who are obviously getting paid by the left started having semi-reasonable takes that were semi-principled and not based in just complete and total propaganda all the time? Basically what would happen with that is their whole crowd would just disappear. 90% of people, 95% of it would just completely drop overnight, right? The paper comes back unread. Wynand thought he had power. He believed that his papers molded public opinion. Barely he discovers that his paper never belonged to him but the crowd, and that public opinion dictated his policies and not vice versa. Wynand discovers belatedly that in seeking power, man delivers himself to the very individual he seeks to rule. He learns that a ruler must placate those rules and that his life is dominated by the values of his subjects. If a ruler attempts to follow on his own conscience, if he decides to flout the wishes of the herd, then the herd turns on him, throwing off his authority and turning to another. Wynand discovers that a power seeker has no power, and his own life was based on a lie. Yeah, that's kind of a brutal, and at the end we do see Wynand kind of turn into this shell of himself with this realization, but this does a pretty good job of clearing things up, more so than I understood. Yeah, basically too, he's deceiving his victims, and he poses as a humanitarian. I thought the most instructive moment in the whole book was when Toohey went to Keating's house and just bitched him out, basically. Or he basically just told him to his face flat out. Okay, so going over Henry Cameron. Cameron's more than Roark's employer and architectural teacher. As a mentor, he's the closest thing to a father that Roark has. Cameron is a brilliant and innovative thinker. As a fictional example, as an early modern designer who is among the first to build skyscrapers, he is similar to the real-life architect of Louis Sullivan from 1856 to 1924. Cameron stands for the great innovators rejected by society. His genius is repudiated and he dies a commercial failure. His struggle against the society close to his revolutionary ideas is represented of many free thinkers of history. Socrates, Galileo, Darwin, and the Wright brothers, and many more were rejected, even persecuted, for the bold daring of new truths they presented, and so it is with Cameron. Roark reveres Cameron because the older man's genius, his independent thinking, and his lifelong crusade for modern architecture despite the price he must pay. Further, Cameron, though bitter, is a profoundly benevolent figure in Roark's life. After 3 years of rejection by faculty members and administrators at Stanton Institute, Roark finds a man by one glance at his drawings, recognizes him as a budding genius. Cameron, the crusty curmudgeon, takes Roark into his charge and devotes himself to nurturing the precious talent. with which has been entrusted. Even on his deathbed, Cameron continues to mentor his protege, instructing him to watch carefully the latest developments of the light metals and plastic industry, exhorting him to discover new forms of building made possible by the technological advances. Though a commercial failure, Cameron is more than a moral and artistic success. Through the triumph of his symbolically adopted son Roark, he helps ensure the final victory for his architectural principles. Wow, okay, this just missed one of the most important things I thought about Henry Cameron, where it said something about how like he's like a drinker or whatever, and he was having like drinking problems. That stuck with me throughout the whole book, and I thought that kind of tainted Henry Cameron a little bit. Like, I thought that Cameron was having, serious financial problems because he wasn't getting clients because his reputation's too, like, crazy, or whatever. But I thought that what really shot him down for me was, like, he was drinking, right? So if he was, like, drinking and he would show up to, like, work drunk or whatever, that, like, what genius of his time is doing that, right? So in my eyes, I really didn't think that Cameron was all that special, even though I like Cameron and basically every other aspect other than that, right? I was thinking, like, what kind of revolutionary person, why would Roark go to someone who was like drinking during that, right? So I'm pretty sure that was the case. I might have missed that, but I thought I remember seeing something specific about him having a serious like drinking problem. I'm not sure if that's other people's like propaganda in the novel that were talking about him, or that was like genuinely what was happening. I don't remember. That was like 2 weeks ago. Now for Stephen Mallory, a pretty strange character in this, but fun to like. Mallory is a brilliant and young sculptor who becomes a close friend of Roark's. His work demonstrates an exalted view of the human potential. He sculpts figures of man, the hero, capable of achievement. Roark understands that Mallory is the best sculptor there is. Your figures are not what men are, but what men could be and should be. Roark tells Mallory, because your figures are more devoid in contempt for humanity than any other work I've seen, because you have magnificent respect for the human being, because your figures are heroic in man. But when Roark meets him, Mallory is already cynical and embittered, disillusioned by rejection. Mallory at the time is a younger version of Henry Cameron, a brilliant innovator whose work differs sharply from conventional standards, causing him to be rejected by most of society. Like Cameron, Mallory is loyal to his ideas and will not compromise. But also like Cameron, unlike Roark, Mallory is affected by rejection. Although independent in thought and action, he is still tied to the beliefs of others at an emotional level. The repudiation hurts him, angers him, and wrangles his soul, leaving him bitter. Mallory is not as independent as Roark and is on his way to alcoholism and despair, but if symbolically Cameron is Roark's father, then Mallory is his younger brother. It is too late for Roark's undiluted independence to have a positive impact in Cameron's life, but not on Mallory's. Roark's character and conduct are an aspiration to Mallory, helping him realize that a man's value and ideals are the most important elements of his life, not the belief of others. Okay, so Stephen Mallory, I'm pretty sure, tried to assassinate Ellsworth Toohey earlier in the novel. I feel like it's kind of bullshit because when they met, right, you don't get like a whole lot of background on it. Like, why would a person who's so good at sculpting really want to shoot like someone who's like spouting communism? Like, I thought it was BS. I just didn't think it was that well done. I liked Mallory as a character after we meet him. During the meeting with Roark, I like him too. But before that, it's like, okay, like, are you a normal person? Like, as it becomes a more important person in the novel, you start to go back to it and be like, you tried to assassinate someone? Like, come on. Anyway, other than that, I really like Stephen Mallory. Austin Heller, another player. This is another character. So a lot of these characters kind of get written about for a smaller portion in the novel, and then they just get completely forgotten about for a few hundred pages, so it's a little bit harder to remember. This was a bigger problem in Atlas Shrugged, because the book was just straight up bigger, and sometimes you just forget about people for, 600 pages. Austin Heller, a man with individualistic beliefs and as a columnist for a dignified paper, not at all like Wynand's tabloids. He knows nothing about architecture, but he knows what he likes, and he hires Roark to build a private home. Heller's a man who trusts his own judgment. Roark, after all, is not in private practice when Heller hires him. He is a mere employee at the office of John Eric Snight. Although Roark, as of yet, has no professional credentials, Heller hires him on the sole basis of a sketch of the proposed house. The merit of Roark's design is the only credential that Heller requires. Heller's character is demonstrated by means of several important details. The first is that he will not give a penny to charity. The second is that he gives more money than he can afford to help political prisoners around the globe. Heller refuses to contribute to charity because he believes that this is merely furthers financial dependence and is therefore not the recipient of self-interest. Ooh. His generous aid to political prisoners is consistent with this. Political prisoners have committed no criminal actions. Their only wrongdoing is their commitment to political freedom and free speech and dictatorship. These are free-thinking individuals with the courage to stand up for their ideals, though it is unpopular, even dangerous to do so in their societies. Heller is a consistent supporter of independence, and for this reason, a friend and ally of Roark. Yeah, Heller was like the first person in the novel that really stood up for Roark from what I remember. But something I really want to talk about at length here. Heller refuses to contribute to charity because he believes this is merely furthers financial independence and is therefore not in the recipient's self-interest. So I think that we all agree, right, that when you pay taxes to the government, it gets given at about 30 cents on the dollar. So if you give $10,000 to the government, the person that you're supposed to be helping is going to get $3,000 worth of aid. So $7,000 just kind of disappears into the black void of government, right? And we're just supposed to accept that this is like normal, right? We can all agree that this is horseshit, and we should just not be paying taxes to the government if that's the rate they're going to use. Not that that can really be improved, or even if it was improved, it would be like 90 or 95. But even if you give to charity, it's like what 75 to 85% of proceeds actually go to their intended person, which is like what 3 times better than government. But this is talking about like, what if you gave like 100% of your donation to the person who needs financial dependence? Should you give it to that person? If the person's not able to find a fish on his own, then it's really not in his interest to give him the fish, because then he just becomes a dependent person, right? You don't want to feed animals in nature, because if you feed them, they're going to come back to you rather than be able to find their own food, right? Because that's how they found their food. They just know you're going to give it to them, right? And that's the problem with charity, right? So this is tough, right? Because you want to think about, you still want to help people, right? But the easy solution is to just give them money, right? But you have to be able to teach them to think for themselves, is basically the novel's trying to tell you to do, right? That's your best line of defense, is to help them think for themselves and not just give them money, right? Give them a way to actually make money, right? I'm going to put the Mike over here. Mike Donnigan. Ooh, we like him. Though a relatively minor figure in the novel, Mike's character dramatizes a significant point in Rand's philosophy. Mike is a construction worker and an electrician who both admires competence and recognizes works. Their mutual love of construction is the bond that unites them. Mike is not a genius. He's a man of more modest intelligence than Roark, but he knows buildings, and he sees with his own eyes and understands with his mind. Mike recognizes that the buildings of Guy Francon, Ralston Holcombe, and Peter Keating are seriously flawed. The adulation these men receive from society does not alter Mike's judgment. He also recognizes that the buildings of Henry Kamen and Howard Roark are masterpieces, and society's repudiation of them cannot change his mind. Mike's character shows independence is not a matter of a person's intelligence, but rather how he chooses to use it. Ellsworth Toohey possesses greater mind power than does Mike's, but Toohey's mind is employed in an utterly dependent manner, devoted to flattering, deceiving, and manipulating others into order to control their souls. Mike's mind is not given to other people, but rather to building. He may not be genius, but within the scale of his own concerns, Mike is an independent thinker. His combination of ordinary intelligence and first-hand method, Mike can be thought as every man at his best. His autonomous functioning is not merely the basis of his bond with Roark, but further demonstrates that moral character is not a question of intelligence, but of its use. I really liked Mike. I liked when we met him. That whole thing where Roark just makes him look stupid, and then they both kind of laugh about it, and they become good friends after that. I thought that was pretty cool, but it was pretty random for Roark to just look at this random guy and then know that, hey, you're supposed to be doing it this way, right? That was kind of like out of nowhere. Anyway, Mike's a cool character, and we like him. Maybe he does have moderate intelligence, but if moderate intelligent people just decide to use their own mind rather than just be parasites, the world would be a different place, right? Trying to get them there, though, different ballgame. Kent Lansing is probably one of my favorite minor characters straight up. Lansing's a salesman with a rare appreciation of artistic genius and even rare willingness to fight for it. He's a member of the board formed to build the Aquitania Hotel, a luxury establishment in Central Park South. Lansing recognizes Roark's extraordinary talent, even though this is at an early point in Roark's career. His major projects have been limited to the Enright house and the Cord building. Lansing's supreme virtue is a stubborn commitment to fight for his values and indomitable doggedness that enables him to triumph over a multitude of obstacles across a period of years to construct the Aquitania as he deserves it. When construction of the hotel stopped due to a series of lawsuits, Lansing vows to win legal control of the project and retain Roark to complete it. Promising to finish no matter the length of time required, Lansing advises Roark, "I won't tell you to be patient. Men like you and me would not survive beyond their first 15 years if they had not acquired the patience of a Chinese executioner and the height of a battleship." Though it takes 5 years to successfully resolve the legal disputes, Lansing perseveres. He keeps his word, and Roark eventually completes the hotel. Lansing describes himself as a salesman and shows Roark the value of a middleman. He says that Roark could explain to the board the proper reasons for hiring him much more effectively than anyone else, but the board's members will not listen to him. They will reject as selfishly prejudicial any remarks on his hiring that Roark makes. Lansing points out that people often find it easier to pass judgment on a man rather than on an idea, even though it is both illogical and unjust to judge a man without considering the content of his thinking. Lansing explains to Roark the reasons for this. He says that to understand and evaluate a man's thinking requires firm principles and standards which, tragically, most people lack. Surprise, they do not possess carefully thought out and tested principles of their own. They merely allow themselves to be buffeted on serious issues by the important people in their lives. In short, most people are followers and are too afraid to stand on their own. They will not see the truth of new ideas created by an innovator like Roark. They need to hear it from others. They need to hear it from a middleman. And the more middlemen, the better. Because men generally fear independence, a revolutionary thinker like Roark needs a few rare men like Lansing to both recognize and fight for the merit of his work. Lansing plays an invaluable role in Roark's life. He understands the brilliance of Roark's creative work and will take on any obstacle to procure a Roark design for his hotel. In the struggle that Lansing fights and wins, he demonstrates that independence and integrity are not the exclusive prerogative of the creative artist, but are sometimes possessed by the middleman as well. I really like Lansing. Lansing was introduced as a really great character. They had a little bit of... I forgot that he was a salesman. husband, but yeah, in that little introduction they had together, yeah, I think he remembers. I remember him being specifically saying that he was a middleman. And he really liked it, and he would fight to the death against the board. And the board is just like a self-fulfilling prophecy where it's all these people who are probably just designed to really just say no, right? Anyway, I really, really like Lansing. The only thing that I don't like that happened with Lansing is we see Lansing for this little while. The Aquitania gets paused. Okay, then we hear, this will take whatever amount of time. I'm going to call you no matter what. Then we just don't see Lansing for a long time, and it was kind of disappointing because when Roark gets the call and Lansing says finally we won the lawsuit, you can do it. It was maybe a paragraph that you got, not even that long. Maybe it was like 2 sentences where like, and then Roark built the Aquitania, and that was it. That was like all you heard. Lansing, I think, was at the end of the novel, and that's that. He got like 3 sentences more. Unfortunate. I like this character, but I wish he got more time in the book. Roger Enright. Honestly, I don't remember who this is. Enright's a tough, hard-bitten entrepreneur who began his career as a coal miner in Pennsylvania who earned his fortune through years of prodigious effort. But Enright's more than a self-made millionaire. His method of conducting business is strikingly innovative. He branches out into many fields, ranging from the oil business into publishing and from restaurants to the manufacture of refrigerators. Before entering a field, Enright studies it assiduously, gaining a wealth of information, then proceeds to overturn every element of accepted wisdom in the industry, acting as though he had never heard of what had previously been done. Some of his innovative ventures fail, though many succeed, and he continues to run them all with ferocious energy, working 12 hours a day. Enright's independence extends to other aspects of his life as well. He refuses to buy or sell stock. He owns his fortune single-handedly, as simply as if he carried all his cash in his pocket. When he decides to construct a building, Enright searches for the proper architect for 6 months, then hires Roark at the end of a 30-minute interview. Enright tells Roark not to bother explaining the building to him because he has no abstract ideals or principles and has no capacity to learn any. He says that he simply goes by what he likes, but I do know what I like. Enright, like Lansing, not only knows what he wants, but he's willing to break all the established conventions to accomplish it. It is a surprise neither that Enright attends Roark's trial for the Cord Land dynamiting, sitting with Roark's other friends, nor that he buys from the government site the plans and the ruins of the Cord Land, and then hires Roark to build it with the exact accordance with Roark's original design. Enright is the fictional epitome of an independent entrepreneur who rises from the bottom by the means of his own talent and work ethic. As such, it is natural they would admire, hire, and befriend Roark. Okay, so it looks like he was basically mentioned in part 2 of the book, and there's a few characters like this that I just kind of forget about, but I do remember seeing the Enright house being talked about quite a bit. But after you go through page 200 and you're at page 700, you're like, who is this guy again? Guy Francon. Guy Francon is a mediocre architect who attains commercial success by the consumer mastery of the social graces. Handsome, well-groomed, impeccably dressed, charming, and debonair, whatever the hell that means. Francon wines and dines prospective clients at New York's most exclusive restaurants. He offers the public impressive Greek columns and showy white marble fronts. His work is all glitter and no substance. He's a phony and second-hander. His success is based on 2 factors. He copies from classical designers. He impresses customers with suave urbanity. He imitates and receives undeserved acclaim. This is his career. What is suave urbanity refers to polished, sophisticated, charming demeanor often associated with city-dwelling elite. He imitates, receives undeserved acclaim. This is his career. But despite these serious flaws, Francon possesses good qualities that enable him to attain a level of happiness in the end. Francon's virtues are of beauty, charm, fine attire, and are good things. And though Francon is an egregious imitator, at least he has the good judgment to copy from the geniuses of classical Greece. He is a conformist but chooses to mimic the best of what society believes. But above all, of all the second-handers, Francon is the least antagonistic to Roark. Though he does not approve of the Solder Temple, he refuses to testify at the trial because, says Dominique, he did not think we were behaving like gentlemen. Critically, Francon not only loves his daughter, he does so for the right reason, her unconquerable soul. Whenever he thinks he should hate her, his mind reverts involuntarily to another incident of her childhood in which she leapt at an obstacle he thought that was too high for her. It is engraved in his memory as the greatest illustration of freedom and ecstasy he's ever witnessed. At some unspoken level of emotion, he realizes what this says about Dominique's spirit. Because of this, he realizes that Roark is the right man for her and is happy. Despite the scandalized embarrassment of his friends, Guy Francon sits with Roark's allies at the Cord Land trial. That was probably the most surprising part in the book to me. I couldn't believe that. Francon's redeeming characteristic is his genuine love for his daughter's best qualities. This means that in spite of the insincere nature of his career, there remains in Francon's soul at least one unbetrayed element, commitment to life and achievement of happiness. Yeah, Guy Francon was all over the place in the first part of the book, and I think probably the second part too. The first half of the novel for sure, he was like always being mentioned, right? He fired Roark at one point because Roark pissed him off so much with his uncompromising demeanor when he worked for Keating and Francon. And Guy Francon, I would agree, he was like the least antagonistic person. It seemed to have kind of a turnaround at the end of the novel. That's probably one person who we saw that really, really did have a turnaround. If I had to give like the award of like most changed, or at least like changing a lot during the novel, he's going to be up there. Even though he was like almost a major character in the beginning of the novel, and then he just like disappears for like a long time, right? He retired, of course, and that was that. Catherine Halsey is a victim of Ellsworth Toohey and is a perfect example of Toohey's ghastly method of power seeking. Early in the story, Katie is a sincere, good-natured girl genuinely in love with Peter Keating. Though she had not been a great high school student, she planned on going to college, a goal supported by Keating, but not her uncle Toohey. She is wishy-washy regarding this and allows Toohey to talk her out of it. The one consuming passion of Katie's life is her love for Keating. Her uncle works hard to convince Keating to woo Dominique, not Katie, knowing if his scheme succeeds, he will have reached two goals at once. He will empty Keating's soul of its last personal value and deprive Katie's soul of its only value. The lives of both will then be devoted to meeting, love, and passion. Both will be internally empty vessels, lost at sea, floundering, existing in painful misery, crying for the leader to guide them. This is exactly what happens. Keating loves Katie, but abandons her for his showcase wife in the person of Dominique. Keating's betrayal is a crushing blow to Katie. Toohey succeeds in conquering both their souls. Katie, in empty despair, turns the altruistic creed of her uncle, becoming an effective miniature version of Toohey, seeking her spiritual power over the poor individuals whom she ministers as a social worker. So Katie seemed pretty innocent at the beginning of the novel, but something I really was not having an easy time detecting was the relationship between her and her uncle. And I guess he was trying to get Keating to woo Dominique. I don't remember the uncle Toohey's viewing this. When Keating meets Katie by chance on the streets of New York years after abandonment of her, total plot armor convenience moment. She's a bustling Washington bureaucrat who exists to give orders, not big orders or cruel orders, just mean little ones about plumbing and disinfectants. She's neither angry, hurt, or embarrassed at their meeting. She simply takes unstrained control of their time, tells him what he will eat, and listens in amused tolerance to his heartbreaking admission that marrying her was the only thing he ever wanted to do. Katie is Toohey writ small. She possesses no values or personal love. She considers them selfish, only a desire of small matters in the lives of weak people who are either unable to or willing to control their own lives. As a consequence of possessing a soul devoid of personal values, she's an unfeeling automaton who bustles through her days in cold, controlling efficiency. Yeah, that was pretty disappointing when they both met each other by total chance in New York, and they had that coffee together, and that was just like, oof. Man, this chick really changed, you know? She changed for the much worse. As a chilling victim of Toohey's power lust, Katie serves to illustrate an important point in an aspect of Rand's philosophy. Her sweetness, innocence, and good nature are inadequate to protect her from Toohey's evil. She's a conventional person, dutifully following her uncle and family, not too ambitious, not committed to her living by her own judgment or pursuing her own dreams. Her lack of independence, her unwillingness to bear the responsibility of the sustained, self-initiated thought costs her the loss of her soul. An uncritical emotional sweetness of disposition is insufficient to gain a person happiness to protect her against evil. She needs to use her own mind to think of herself. A lack of independent thinking is what dooms Katie's attempts to gain love and happiness. Okay. Wow, that is a really, really profound way to put that. I didn't think of it that way. But basically, that's kind of true, right? Because she's not thinking for herself, and she's listening to a lot of what her uncle says. She's very wishy-washy at the beginning of the novel, right? Because there's so many times where, like, it was like, well, my uncle says this, right? She's just very, like, not thinking for herself. And this is really, like, the majority of, like, the society, right? So we have a bunch of NPCs, right? And they're kind of in the same thing where they think, like, they're not really thinking for themselves, but they kind of just say, like, well, a lot of society thinks this way, so I guess I'll do that, right? And because you have all this goodness and kind of innocence, it's not enough to protect yourselves from the Tooheys and the evil people like that of the world, right? Who are trying to manipulate you. Just because you're an innocent person doesn't prevent that evil, and you have to, unfortunately, just think for yourself. Or at least be like Mike, who can, you know, have moderate intelligence, but think for himself. That's the most important thing. Think for your fucking self. It's not easy, and it requires effort, but it is well more rewarding than just sitting there being an NPC, having someone put all this information into your head, right? And then you'll just be like a program at that point. Moral of the story, think for your fucking self. Lois Cook, another small character that I didn't really understand a whole lot of. She appears like 3 times, probably. Lois Cook is an outstanding example of the meaning of nonconformity. She defies social belief in beauty, attractive living quarters, and even personal hygiene. In this regard, she is far worse than Guy Francon. Critically follows the best of society's norms, where Cook rebels against them. Worse than this is her incoherent style of writing. She rebels against grammar, meaning intelligibility. Her book has no discernible meaning, yet she postures as a profound thinker. All she needs is a few power-seeking critics like Ellsworth Toohey to sing praises of her books, and the followers like Keating, too timid to form their own judgments, will accept Toohey's evaluations. I guess I didn't pick up on that, but yeah, it's pretty true. If you just have like the high priest or the people who are like in the power, I guess you could say, ooh, look at this book that's kind of dog shit. It's really good, right? And I think now that I'm thinking about it, there was a part where where either Keating specifically asked or someone had read it, and Toohey specifically asked, like, what did you think of it? And they said, like, well, I don't know. I don't really know much about it, or I didn't think that much about it. And then he like sings praises about it, and that like flips their opinion like that. There's something like that in the novel at some point. I can't remember exactly. That was probably like part 2 is my guess. Lois Cook is not merely a second-hander whose life is dominated by the people against whose values she rebels. She's an example of nihilism, a desire to destroy the best that human society has to offer. She doesn't fight against vulgar tabloids, corrupt politicians, a widespread illiteracy, or any of society's ills. Instead, she attacks cleanliness, beauty, and literary intelligibility, the best of men's values. As one of Toohey's more important proteges, Lois Cook is committed to destruction, as is her leader. Okay, totally missed that. That went way over my head. I was not thinking it that way over the novel, but unfortunately for those of us who have only been gifted moderate intelligence, Cliffnotes over here is really kind of doing some thinking for us, huh? Ironic. Gus Webb. This is one guy whose name I kept seeing over and over and over, and I was just like, who is this guy? Who is this guy? Who is this guy? And then him and like Ralston Holcombe, both of them, I just could not remember who they were, right? Gus Webb's an avant-garde architect, another of Toohey's followers whose buildings are mere collections of boxes piled on another. He lacks all standards of design, even borrowed ones. His stacks of boxes disregard all questions of a building's functions, its needs, its practical requirements. Like Lois Cook, Webb is a nihilist, a rebel against the best of other men's values. He isn't bathed, he delights in uttering obscenities. To well-bred ladies he passes in the street, and his personality is that of a vulgar lout. He's a second-hander whose life is ruled by the middle-class individuals he loathes and defies. I mean, I always know that there's a few stooges in here that are in like Toohey's camp and there's like minions. And this is like one of them, right? But again, maybe through like such mediocrity, these characters, like she's intentionally trying to make them like kind of forgettable just because her whole thing is like very anti-left, right? Webb speaks of the movement and of the workers' revolution. His response to Roark's dynamiting of Cortland is revealing. I wish he'd blasted it when it was full of people, a few children blown to pieces, then you'd have something. Then I'd love it. This movement could use it. Wow, it's a lot more violent than I remember. Gus Webb is a fictional forerunner of the new left of the 1960s. Whereas the old left of the 1930s, represented by Toohey, was a movement of cultured, highly educated individuals. The new left scorned theory and intellect, opted instead for political activism. At a political level, Webb's character represents a prediction by Rand. Because Marxism stands for totalitarian dictatorship and suppression of the free-thinking mind, it must necessarily lose all vestiges of cultural intellectuality. It must degenerate into a movement of unbathed, drug-addicted activists who physically occupy classrooms and shut down the educational process. The character of Gus Webb, Ayn Rand, predicted the existence and the nature of the new left 25 years before it appeared in the American cultural scene in the late 1960s. You know what? If this book was written in the 40s, well done. Well done. And I guess that does kind of say something. It's always going to devolve into something that's anti-intellectual, like at its very core, right? So I guess when you're born in 1997 like I am, and you think of the old left and the new left of like the 30s and the 60s, I don't know what the fuck the difference is between the left of the 30s and the 60s is, right? So it goes from highly cultured and educated individuals to this kind of let's just go trash some shit in the 60s. I mean, I know that in China, right, weren't they executing the intellectuals? I thought, let's look that up. So I remember I've heard about this before, like when we look at China, right, the old ideas of culture, custom, and habits, right? Anything that kind of represents the culture just becomes like an anti-cultural, anti-intellectual movement, right? I mean, we're seeing the same bullshit in America today, right? This is not like it's new rocket science, right? This is just what's going to devolve into generally, right? It may start out one way, but it's generally going to turn back to its roots of just like anti whatever, right? Let's just go burn down a bunch of shit, tangibly and intangibly. Let's go through some critical essays. Now, I'm not going to read all of this with you because that'll take way too long, but I'm just going to kind of skim through this and see what important points I can find. The theme of the Fountainhead is the contrast of and conflict between persons of independent functioning and those dependent functioning. The plot is an ideal vehicle by which to present this theme, just like Atlas Shrugged. The essence of the plot is innovative, struggling against a society indifferent or hostile to revolutionary ideas. The innovative is an independent thinker. Those who reject them are independent persons in one form or another, allowing the thinking of others to dominate in their lives. They are unwilling to see the truth of new ideas. Note that it is impossible to discuss the novel's plot without introducing its theme. Duh. These two are inextricably intertwined, which can be seen by analyzing the specific men who reject Roark. These men fall into three types of categories, and each variation is a theme of psychological dependence. So the first is traditionalist, the second is a conformist, and the third is a socialist. Traditionalists blindly wed to the thinking of the past, and they cannot see the truth of any new ideas. Darwin's theory of evolution, right? Fulton's steamboat, because everything was a sail before. The ocean's flat and you just fall off. There's no other world out there, right? Among those opposed to Cameron and Roark, there are many of the same type. The Dean at Stanton believes that all truths of architecture have already been discovered, so you can't evolve, right? Guyver and Cohn is an imitator and Ralston Holcombe is a Renaissance guy. Interesting. The traditionalists believe that an age of an idea, particularly its old age, is a conclusive factor certifying its truth. To them, the truth is not a relationship between an idea and fact, but between an idea and their ancestors. They are blinded to the present by their commitment to the past. That is why the Dean, Guy Francon, and Ralston Holcombe are unable to recognize the merits of Cameron's and Roark's innovations. That's an interesting idea. It's an idea between them and their ancestors, not a relationship between an idea and fact. Okay, the second type of men who reject Roark are conformists, those who blindly accept the ideas of their peers. Many such people can be found in life. Most people who hold religious convictions, be they Catholic, Protestant, Jew, or Muslim, do not study comparative religion but simply accept the belief of their families. Ooh, that's a pretty good truth. Some individuals surrender their career, performance, or romantic choice to meet their parents' expectations. Others may know the dangers of drug use, but to please their friends, indulge nonetheless. Similarly, the universe of the Fountainhead is populated with such characters. Numerous individuals reject his ideas. For example, Mundy, who I don't remember, asks Roark to build him a southern-style plantation house not because he values it, because it is a symbol of the aristocrats who ridiculed him as a young man. Though Roark explains patiently that such a house would not stand for his own struggle of values, but the values of his tormentors, Mundy refuses to acknowledge Roark's point. He wants the plantation house because others valued it. Miss Wilmot of Long Island wants to hire her so that she could tell her friends she has Austin Howard's architect. She wants English Tudor. I vaguely remember her. I do remember Mundy, like, very vaguely. Members of the board of Jan Stass Real Estate Company refused Roark's design because nobody's ever built anything like it. John Snight, an architect for whom Roark briefly works, differs from Guy Francon's commitment. Snight is not wedded to any school of design. He cheerfully gives the public whatever style it wants. Mostly, there's Keating, who's driven by an uncontrollable urge to impress and win and acclaim others, of course. Keating wants prestige. He's an intellectual chameleon who takes the belief of others in order to gain their approval. Keating expresses his policy as a formal principle when he states to Roark, always be what the people want you to be. Then you've got them where you want them. I remember reading that and being that pretty cringy, right? Keating's code is the perfect expression of conformism, putting the beliefs of others above and before functioning of his own mind. Such an unthinking mentality is incapable of recognizing the genius of Roark's work, or that of any other innovator. Yeah, there was some point in there where he like pretended that he had played tennis or something, or he said to Roark that he should have pretended that he played tennis when someone asked him about it, and you just read that and you go, ugh. The third and last type of men who reject Roark are the socialists, those committed to the principle that is the individual's unchosen moral obligation to serve society and to the political economic implementation of this belief. In real life, examples of socialist principles include the contemporary American welfare state that compels productive individuals to support the non-productive. Okay, we're gonna read that one for everyone in the back. In real life, examples of socialist principles include the contemporary American welfare state that compels productive individuals to support the non-productive. Yeah, that's always the case. That's a huge problem, and we have to get rid of that. Yeah, that's a long way away from getting rid of that, though. Crazy. What's crazy though is that this is written in the 40s, right? This is written before LBJ's war on poverty, right? Before the Great Society horseshit and all that crap, with all the massive welfare. So anyway, various socialist states in Europe and around the globe provide a similar and much more extreme example. Finally, communism and fascism, the fullest, most consistent political expressions of an individual's duty to selflessly serve society. Wow, I'm surprised. Is Cliffnotes based or something? I've never gotten the idea that Spark Notes or any of these kind of websites for even like a writer like Ayn Rand into such socialism bashing like terms. Like this is like that's pretty much what it is, right? Like at the end of the day, they're not trying to whitewash it. Still exists as ideologies as forms of government in some countries. Howard Roark is an example of a creative mind. He's more than an independent thinker. He's a genius. He's a fictional example of the greatest minds of history. The exalted thinkers who discovered important new truths only to be rejected by society. Wright brothers scoffed at, Robert Fulton ridiculed, Louis Pasteur bitterly denounced. So yeah, that makes sense. He's just architecture and like the trains and Atlas Shrugged are just the vehicle for the story. It could be about anything. It could be about like airplanes, movies, like who cares, right? Keating and Toohey are also obvious variations of the novel's themes. Keating is a status seeker, a man so afraid to risk social disapproval that he willingly surrenders to his mind to others. He's an example of the pitiable nature of conformity, the motives, the behavior, the consequences, resulting in a man whose soul is voluntarily turned over to society. Despite an endless series of malicious actions, Keating is ultimately a pathetic person, not an evil one, and a pathos containing a warning. A man betrays his soul at his own peril. The person who is dependent on social approval for his self-esteem sacrifices his values and his mind and necessarily ends as an empty shell of a man. Power seeking is another form. Ayn Rand makes important points regarding the nature of the man who pursues power over other men. Cult leaders and dictators have not been viewed as weak psychological dependence, but it's the opposite. Strong individuals whose control over others is a logical expression of their strength. Civilized men prior to Ayn Rand had rejected the belief that there is glory to conquest, but still believed it to represent strength. Roark is a strong man, one willing to accept the responsibilities of independent thinking. He looks at facts, he judges, he stands on his own convictions, regardless of the beliefs of the crowd. Because Roark is a thinker, he's not tied to social approval. He looks at the outer world, to the nature, for the truth, consequently he's able to build. The man, the one who conquers nature, is the man with power. This is human strength. Wynand and Dominique are also variations on the novel's theme, though in a form much less readily discernible. Wynand is a mixed case. A commonly held belief in our society says that there's no black and white, all are shades of gray. The characters in the Fountainhead show clearly how Ayn Rand disagrees with this view. Roark, Keating, and Toohey are blends of independence of good and evil. Rather, each is utterly consistent, fully of one or the other. In his private life, Wynand lives by his own judgment. Because he is an idealist who reveres human excellence, his personal life is filled with examples of man's achievements. He recognizes Roark's genius and commissions him to design major buildings. Likewise, he recognizes Roark's integrity and embraces him as his dearest friend. Despite Dominique's errors, he identifies immediately her nobility of spirit and falls deeply in love with her. Finally, he fills his private art gallery with works of the only most exquisite beauty. Wynand's private life is full of faithful accordance with his own exalted standards. I thought that was one of the more interesting aspects of Wynand's personality. He would kind of hoard these objects in like his own art gallery or whatever, right? Dominique believes that virtue has no chance to succeed in a corrupt world, that great men like Roark are doomed to suffer the fate of Cameron, finishing as lonely outcasts, phonies like Francon, manipulators like Keating, powerlusters like Toohey. These contemptible persons are the ones who succeed in the world. Roark, Dominique believes, is heading towards a tragic fate. Ayn Rand calls this pessimistic view of life the malevolent universe premise. Although her belief is grounded, her generalization is unwarranted. Ultimately, Roark does not merely succeed, he succeeds because he's a man of uncompromising principles. Keating does not merely fail, he fails because he sells his soul. Toohey does not merely fail in both attempts to stop Roark and control Wynand papers. He fails because his corrosive evil only has the power to destroy, not the power to create. There are like the people and the creators in society, people who actually like move things forward, and there's also people who only know how to destroy stuff or just steal stuff, right? The pilferers. And this was really more emphasized in Atlas Shrugged with all of the freeloaders and the people from the government like Mr. Thompson or whatever. But this is what happens when you allow all these people to kind of come together and try to rule you. And this is really what like government is as a whole, right? The same is true regarding many of the book's lesser characters. Henry Cameron and Stephen Mallory are good examples. Cameron and Mallory are both innovative thinkers, creative geniuses whose ideas are rejected by society. Both refuse to compromise and each pays a price for his integrity. Both, in other words, are independent in thought and action. But both are hurt and angered by the unjust treatment they receive from society. Cameron becomes bitter and cynical, and Mallory, when Roark meets him, is moving in that direction. Like Roark, they are uncompromising men of integrity. They too, in thought and deed, will not betray their own minds. But unlike Roark, Cameron and Mallory permit society's rejection to fester at an emotional level. The rejection matters to them in a personal way, in a way that goes into a harmful impact on their careers. Where Roark has integrated the virtue of independence throughout every aspect of this person, thought, action, and emotion, Cameron and Mallory fallen short. Though admirable men, they possess a tragic flaw absent in Roark. They allow the belief of others to cause them emotional pain. Consequently, they do not live a full state of joy and pride that their glorious achievements should provide. The undeserved suffering of these two men, at one level, is an indictment of a tradition-bound society that rejects innovators. At a deeper level, their suffering is an exhortation to original thinkers not to permit the beliefs of others to hold power over them. These two heroes thereby represent one aspect of the theme. The virtue of independence must be assimilated into every aspect of a man's life, the emotional as well as the intellectual and practical. So I guess that kind of explains why Cameron was drinking, because I guess he got more and more cynical as time went on that he was being unjustly treated. I guess that Roark really just looked at Cameron's work. And so like, yep, that's my guy. I'm going to him. I don't give a fuck. But I guess that was what was kind of disappointing to me and kind of stuck with me throughout the novels. Like Cameron was like drinking, dude, he was not handling that shit well, right? And when I kind of see that, even if someone's great at something, I still try to shy away from that, right? Because even if that person is really talented and they have like a bad attitude, or they're handling their rejection at such a poor level, there is going to be some toxicity involved with that, right? So this is an interesting point about Heller that we'll just kind of talk about very quickly again. One more note about Guy Francon down here is, for example, he's a phony, he's impeccable manners and elegant garb, his French vocabulary, all devices calculated to achieve one goal, to impress others. Other than his love for Dominique, Francon has no values of his own. His professional life is a series of actions catering to the taste of the public. He's merely a servant and society is his master. And that's like something you should be really careful of, right? This is where authenticity steps in and you can kind of tell with people, or you really have to listen to your gut because things won't line up, right?
And when it comes to authenticity, which characters represent that? Peter Keating is more or less the antithesis of authenticity. There is basically no self of Peter Keating, while Howard Roark, the total opposite, is authentic in every way, and almost authentic to a fault. Extremely rigid, not budging on anything. That's about as authentic as you can get, right? Think about what your gut says when you meet someone. Within a few seconds, you know whether you're gonna like them or not, generally, right? Authenticity has a lot to do with that, right? If someone's being fake, or you can tell someone's putting on an act, that screams inauthentic, and your gut's telling you this person's not reliable, or you're not gonna like them, or get along with them. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me for this. This was really fun to make, and in the comments, leave who your favorite non-main character was. Mine was Kent Lansing. See y'all for now.